Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome. My name's Johanna and I'm the Talks Programmer at the Photographers Gallery. As some of you will know, the Photographers Gallery, the actual building on Ramillies Street is being refurbished this year. So in the meantime, we're running a sort of itinerant program of talks and events around the Soho area. And this is our 5th talk here at the Architectural Association in our series about photography and the built environment. So tonight we're really pleased to welcome Stephen Gill, a photographer whose work many of you will know from his wonderful publications and also, of course, the recent exhibition at the Brighton Photo Biennale. I'll be running around with a microphone, and if you don't mind just checking that your phones are switched off, that's really just because we're going to be recording the talk tonight, and the phone signals will interfere, even if they're on silent, will interfere with the recording. We're going to try and be quite informal. It's a bit tricky in this kind of formal setting, but we'd like to take any questions or comments or points of discussion throughout the evening. So I've got a microphone and my colleague at the back, Karen's got a microphone, so just sort of put up your hand or start speaking and we'll run to your side. So I'm going to hand straight over to Stephen Gill. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone, thanks for coming. I'm sort of looking forward to this evening, very nervous. So as Joanna said, I mean, it'd be lovely if you could ask questions or make comments during and maybe sort of let the evening sort of take its own shape, really. I've got so many pictures, probably far too many pictures as always. I've tried to whittle out older work to make space for newer work, and some of the work's kind of work in progress. But as the flyer said, I noticed it's predominantly East London, but I have also included other works from outside of London, even outside of the UK. I don't really know where to start. I think maybe I tend to always show the first kind of images of extracts from work I was doing many years ago, and I tend to show these pictures not for any other reason other than, weirdly, they're not pictures taken in London, but I always associate them with London because they were, I think it was at a time in the early 90s when I first moved here and had a kind of craving and strong desire to make work in London, but found it really difficult to kind of get my teeth into and aesthetically get my teeth into London. So I was turning my back on the city and sort of leaving London in search of more kind of unfamiliar territory, or going a lot to Middle Eastern Europe. I'll start with these pictures, and it's weird. I look at them now and think, for me, even though this particular series, they were made in Poland, I still feel they'll probably say more about me wanting to be a photographer during that time than it does about Poland. It's just kind of almost images forming in your head and going and looking for them, or just, I mean, for me, these are very photographic images, and probably not so revealing about Poland in the mid-90s. So I'll whiz through these quite quickly. And I used to make these trips quite a lot and set myself these photographic projects, and with parameters often sort of, in this case, they were geographical, so I was just taking buses and trains, purely going to places to make pictures. So there was no real kind of narrative, or they were quite loose studies. And during this time I was living in London. And this was, between, I guess, 94 and 97 or something. Up until that point I was predominantly working in black and white. And in 1997, I sort of started working in colour, and have worked in colour sort of pretty much since then. Haven't stopped. Occasionally jump outside of back to black and white. And these are pictures taken in Croatia. Again, really loose pictures of friends and their friends. And the couple that feature in this series were my next door neighbours in London. And they moved back to Croatia after the war and invited me, and so I spent quite a lot of time there. So strangely connected to London, but not at all. And this was probably one of the first quite in-depth photo studies that I carried out in London, and it was kind of my only way in, because rather than try and, as much as I had a strong desire to make work here, I just couldn't find a way in. It's so visually overwhelming, London, and it's just, I found it very hard to kind of pin down some of the things that I felt compelled to photograph. So what I decided to do is make these tiny subject parameters and then explore those thoroughly. In this case, it's members of the public listening to music, and I would ask people what they were listening to and could I take their portrait. So they're just quite detached, quite descriptive images, really, compared to the pictures that you saw before, which were a lot more kind of fluid or looser. So the title of this picture is Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits. Paranoid Android, Radiohead. Boyzone. And I think this was sort of, what was it, 1999, I started to work this way, really choosing something I was fascinated with or simply intrigued by, and that intrigue led to kind of obsession, and then I would just, work and spend a lot of time with these subjects, really, until the point where you feel that I really exhausted the subject, or the subject exhausted me, and then I would bring it to a close. This is Love Me Tender, Elvis Presley. DMX, Rough Riders Anthem. Michael Jackson, Bad. And I think, looking at these pictures now, I think this is one of the things photography is really good at, is these sort of comparative studies, just very descriptive, but I guess in sort of around 2006 or so, and you'll see later the work as it changes, I almost got not tired of this, but I think photography is almost too good at this, sort of choosing a subject and a way of working, and then making these comparative studies, sort of variations of the same. This is another study along those lines called Trolley Portraits, and it's pictures of mostly women in London, mostly East London, with trolleys. And yeah, I'm sort of showing extracts from the series today. They're much larger. I think this particular one consists of about 30 pictures or so. And I sometimes sort of trace back what sort of compelled me to start these studies, and this one I can definitely trace back to the point where I was at that point also doing a lot of sort of editorial commissions and to finance my personal work, and I had a really bad back and a slipped disc, and my doctor said to get a trolley. So I think that was the catalyst for me becoming obsessed with these trolleys. And I'll go back one picture, and I used to live in that block there and see all the women with the trolleys, and I think that was enough to spark off my fascination with trolleys, and just this idea of kind of this sense of security walking with a trolley, and I'd speak to the ladies, and mostly people, half of the trolleys were even empty. They could be going to the post office with just a letter or something, but it was just this idea of space or walking aid, or that kind of. I'm still quite interested in them, and I kind of got so obsessed that I looked up the the company that made them, the original Trolleys, not this one. This is an Argos copy, but then I went to the factory and stuff like that, and they were they were founded on the Roman road, the original. Then this is another study I did called billboards, and it's photographs of the back of advertising billboards, and the title for each picture is the strapline of the ad on the front to accompany the image. And I was just quite interested in kind of removing that visual aid, but leaving the title and then just seeing and feeling what you're left with. So the title for each picture is the strapline of the ad. So this one is, I think there's no place like a British gas home, I think. Free SMS when you join Orange Pay As You Go. Gordon's Gin, New Gordon's Edge with a twist of lime. I'll just focus that. No need to keep the receipt, a diamond is forever. So I quite like photography's ability of kind of, I don't know, like turning things out inside out, or kind of not presenting you with the subject. I think I've recently become more interested in sort of not presenting the subject, but holding it back a bit. Cadbury's cream egg, how do you eat yours? Corset, H&M, I think £8.99. What's that one? I think welcome to Marlborough Country, smoking when pregnant harms your baby. The Inland Revenue. L'Oreal Paris, because you're worth it. And again, this is another one of the studies, and something else I was interested in during this time was when we're lost or navigating ourselves around unfamiliar places, and how we use maps and the kind of etiquette of how we ask people and who we choose to ask, and how we kind of turn our body in relation to the map, the piece of paper, and I guess also the way we sort of sometimes step outside of the general flow of people, and so I decided to make a study about this kind of window, almost like quite vulnerable, and also I guess who we choose to ask, and that awkwardness of sometimes when you ask someone, but your hunch is that it was the other way, and then do you go the other way, or do you wait, or do you go the way that you've been told, but then turn around, and all that kind of stuff I find really interesting. This is a series of photographs called Day Return, and it's pictures taken between London, Liverpool Street and Southend-on-Sea. And again, it's I think 38 pictures in the series, so it's quite a large body of work. The finished prints are quite tiny, just like 8 inches tall. And for this series, even though it's called Day Return, actually I did this work over a period of about 2 months, and I caught the same train, usually like the 11 o'clock train from Liverpool Street, going to Southend a few days a week, and I would walk from one end of the train through the cars right to the other end, asking every single passenger if I could take their picture and could they continue what they were doing before I took their picture. So in a way, even though they look quite kind of, what's the word, candid, or they're actually, I see them as sort of collaborative portraits, really. And sometimes I would walk back down the train, and if people had since changed their posture or fallen to sleep or was reading, then often I would take a second picture. Any questions or anything yet?
Yeah, I've got one.
Okay. Shall I go back?
It was actually apropos of the thing before,
Okay.
with the maps.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Right. Is it switched on? Right. Yeah, apropos of the people looking at maps.
Yeah.
What camera did you shoot that on?
God. I think it was a 6.7 plough bell.
So did you just wander around with a plough bell?
Yeah.
Then hoping to find.
Yeah. I did, but literally for months probably. Okay. I mean, I tried to keep away from central London, although central London's always a lure because you know you're going to find more people with maps in central London. But I really didn't want to make it a body of work about tourism. I wanted it to be just about that thing about being lost. So I tried my hardest, I remember, not to make it a thing about or strictly visitors to the city. Yeah, just the feeling of being lost, but I didn't want it to become a thing with people with backpacks and kind of a bit of a joke. I think it was more about that kind of window of vulnerability. And for that series, I didn't ask anybody if I could take their picture, where usually I do, but I really wanted to photograph that moment of being lost. Often I would explain to somebody after that I took their picture and explained that I was hoping to do a book and an exhibition.
I just wondered quite how haphazard it was, you know, in the method, and then how many pictures you got from that particular project.
Yeah, it's just walking, and I think often I would find myself close to the British Museum, which, if that was the case, it was a bit of a shame, but because you'll see thousands of people with maps around the British Museum, so it became too easy, so I try and sort of pull myself away from that part of London.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. This is another series called Invisible, and it's weirdly linked to the billboard series that I showed, even though content-wise they're completely different. What led me to this series was because I was photographing the back of billboards, and I realised that nobody was asking me why I was trespassing or climbing over the fences to photograph them. And I realised because I used a bicycle and had one of those bright jackets, I figured that it was the reason that people weren't saying anything was because of the jacket. So I felt, it just makes you invisible. And I spoke to a few sort of servicemen and women, or sort of key workers in cities, and they agreed that this colour, even though designed to make you more visible, actually can have the opposite effect and you disappear. So hence the title for this series. And this was during a time where I think Britain and most of Europe were becoming obsessed with health and safety, and it became kind of this symbol of, I don't know, you just almost saw the colours sweeping across England. I was really interested in that. So these are sort of people, I guess, that help make a city tick, or sort of calibrate traffic lights, or telephone engineers, and people that just keep a city working. I'll speed up a bit because I've got so many pictures. And I suppose this series, even though it's still one of these bodies of work where I'm leaving my house or my studio with a particular subject in mind, looking for pictures, and in this case, these colours. I think this was almost a little bit of a bridge where the work was starting to get a little bit looser, and I was starting to enjoy photographing the noise of the city and the kind of visual noise that years before I found it hard to get my teeth into, where then I was almost making more quiet and easy to read pictures. I think sorry, that one's a bit weird. Um, and later you'll see my way of working has almost completely shifted now, where I still tend to work with subject parameters, but often now they're sort of geographical. So without these kind of tight, narrow subjects in mind, it's a lot freer and almost allowing the work to make and shape itself. And this probably is a good place to start with that, because I think the Hackney Wick series, which again I stumbled across whilst photographing the back of billboards, this was definitely a body of work where it wasn't sort of concept-led, it was purely, I think the subject really carried me, and I still look at this work now and think this series kind of made itself really and completely shaped itself. They were taken over quite a long period of time, like 3 or 4 years. It was kind of this mad long-term body of work. And this was quite liberating for me, not just because the subject parameters were now so wide, but also the photographs were taken on a plastic camera that I bought at the market in Hackney Wick for 50p. So it was, I think, aesthetically liberating as well, because I think photography in the late 90s and early 2000s was so much about quality and megapixels and DPI. And so I think it was so nice to shake that off and put, for me certainly, and put content at the forefront again and technique second. And I really enjoyed making this work. And as I say, it's really, for me, one of those series where the work sort of, place sort of carried me, really. And like London, I think it was quite evident, it's just, in this particular place, it's like, it was so full of contradictions. On one hand, it's really rich in nature and sort of birds and animals and the canals and so on. But it was quite intense as well. And this Sunday market that used to exist was quite incredible. And I think I started to enjoy at this point that kind of lack of information as well, and pictures that there's almost enough information, but without kind of, steering the viewer, or they're almost like suggesting the shapes were kind of, there was just enough information in the shapes, but I think that's the end of, that carousel. Thank you. And I've got a CD here, so while we're changing that, I can play a quick commercial break audio recording that I've been doing, and I've been making some audio recordings. This is skincare.
Hackney skincare, lightning milk, lactoseed, vitamin E oil, beautifying skin milk, body lotion, morning and evening lotion, morning and evening cream, lemon fed cream, lemon skin lightening lotion, lemon fedding cream, acne pimple medication, fade milk, fade cream, moisturizing lotion, dip cleansing facial astringent, liquid soap, stretch mark cocoa butter, moisturizing body oil, body gloss, cocoa butter cream, cocoa butter lotion, aloe vera lotion, IKB dry skin lotion, Hollywood cocoa butter, Astral cream, Galaxy cream, Nivea cream, Nivea lotion, E45 cream, Vaseline dry skin, MI white lotion, MI white cream, Revlon lotion, Fair Lady lotion.
Recordings I've been doing in Hackney as well, almost attempting to do sort of audio photographs, just very, very descriptive, or asking members of the public to describe in great detail tiny scenes.
Stephen, can I ask about the audio?
Yeah?
About
Oh, there you go.
there we go. With the audio recording, so is it important to you that the one that we just heard there, where it was kind of listing of products?
Yeah.
And in my mind, I start imagining where that could have been or what kind of situation that might have been in.
Yeah.
Is it important to you that you're not giving that information, that information is kind of taking place in the listener's mind, or?
It is. I think in the same sense, like a photographic rectangle, really. I think it's, just snippets, but you're only given a certain amount of information. And also, for the audio recordings, it's, again, in a way I've been attempting to do with my photography, just step back and allow people or the subject to speak for themselves. And I think the audio portraits or the audio photographs is a good attempt for me to do that, where I would ask members of the public to choose, in some cases, a scene, or it could be a paving stone, but then maybe describe that in great detail, or almost far too much detail. I love this idea that, the pictures start to form in our heads, but without any visual aid.
Do they pick the scene, or do you ask them?
People pick the scenes, yeah. But sometimes they're not purely descriptive. Often it's just almost like a promotion for a shop, or it could be somebody sitting at bus stop describing the scene directly in front of them. So they vary in length and content. And
it's a wonderful sort of flattening out almost of information, but at the same time allowing it to sort of expand as much as the listener wants to, I suppose.
Yeah, I think for me it's just so nice I love the idea of trying to extract what a place feels like over what it looks like, just trying to get a feeling. I guess I'm trying to do that more with my photography as well, just because photography is so good at describing things. And I think now these days I'm sort of trying to turn that down and trying to, is it possible to replace that description with the spirit of a place or the feeling? And I keep attempting to do that in many different ways, from sort of burying pictures to putting things in my camera, just trying to get the essence of a place without much information, to the point even recently I've been just turning the information right down, so you I don't know, I think you can get a sort of strong, in a way, a stronger sense of place, because you're not forcing a subject or steering a viewer. There's more space for the subject to breathe, I think. This was one of those attempts where I was actually taking pictures back to close to where they were taken and burying the photographs underground, leaving them there for a period, maybe between sort of a few days and a few weeks, and then digging them up. And this, again, was similar to the audio thing, just trying to encourage the place itself to kind of leave its mark. And I always see these as sort of collaborating with the place itself, and so I do sort of half the work, and the place also literally adds to the image. And this was quite exciting for me as well, I guess, because part of photography is so precious, so it's quite nice to take your nice C-type prints and bury them, and you're kind of working completely blind or half blind as well, because you have no idea what these images are going to look like until you dig them up. So I think this was one of my attempts of kind of jumping outside of photography, at the sort of descriptive photography. And sometimes I would bury the pictures face to face, so the emulsion of one print would leap onto the other, so or sometimes back to back as well. So. And what I did later is use some of these photographs as sort of base pictures, because I forgot to mention, whilst I was making pictures in Hackney Wick, I was also collecting flowers and plants and seeds and objects, and which I would later place on top of C-type prints and re-photograph them. So kind of, again, trying to just really extract subject matter from a place, and extract the spirit of a place. And I think that series is coming next. Yeah, this is called Hackney Flowers, and it's kind of, it adds another element because you've got this absolute clarity because the objects laid on top of the photographs were made on a very high quality camera. So coupled with the base pictures, which may have been on a plastic camera or buried, so the objects are sort of pulling in all sorts of directions, and also sort of scale is out of the window as well. And this was quite a nice way of working, I think, for photographers to, I don't know, because I think usually you when you take pictures, you're moving your body in relation to the subject, or the camera in relation to the subject. This was the first series I had ever done where the camera was fixed and you're just spending a lot of time moving the subject. And for me, I just see this almost like a celebration of nature in cities, or this idea of, even in cities, with sort of the craving of nature, or even symbols of nature and flowers. There was a sort of parallel series I did called Hackney Flower Portraits, and it's pictures of members of the public wearing or carrying floral details. It's quite a large series. I think there's like 47 pictures in this series. And these pictures were made, I think, between 2005 and 2007. That's another carousel, please. So maybe I'll play another audio. maybe a couple.
Question.
One Sunday over the lea, my fella done it to me. He done it once, he done it twice, and then he had the flipping cheek to say it wasn't nice. My mother had a surprise when she saw my old belly rise. What's worth having is worth waiting for. One Sunday over the lea. It's getting bigger. It's getting bigger. Well, once it was nice and small, now it's as big as an old beach ball. I don't care what you people say. I know it's getting bigger, bigger every day. I would if I could, and I'd try to be good, because I'm not that kind of a girl. You can go out riding with little Tommy Tucker. Everybody knows he's a dirty old fella, riding along on his old machine. One Sunday over the lea. There you go. That's an original one, that one.
I didn't think I was going to be playing that one. This is another series sort of made in Hackney. I think it was sort of 2009 I made this body of work. It was during a time where there were so many betting shops surfacing and opening in the area of Hackney. I can't remember how many there were at this time. I think there was like 70 bookies in Hackney Borough alone, and there were sort of 4 William Hills on Mayor Street, and so I really wanted to make a body of work about betting shops for quite a while. I just didn't know how to do it, and I didn't want to photograph like the human element, so I decided I would do these sort of almost in a way like people-less portraits and photograph discarded betting slips that had from the floor of bookies, which I would then photograph and then carefully open up after to reveal the bets that were placed and how much money people lost. So this is called a series of disappointments, and it's just this idea that trying to photograph like the sort of human emotion sort of translated into a piece of paper. And yeah, as I say, the titles, which I'm afraid I haven't got with me. So that was the amount of money and the bets that were placed. So I went, again, it was quite an obsessional thing. I think maybe I spent 2 months, first of all, collecting betting slips and going to all the bookies with a rucksack and just filling them. And then I would select them months later, but I didn't touch them, but choosing them purely for aesthetic reasons and then photographing them. And this series is called Archaeology in Reverse, and it's a kind of almost a continuation of the Hackney Wick study using the similar or the same camera. And there was a period, this sort of 2-year window, where it was sort of post the market, and a lot of the area buildings and businesses had compulsory purchase orders. And there were lots of planning permission things stuck to lampposts, so you could feel something was in the air, something enormous was about to happen. And I thought, since photography so often deals with kind of traces of the past or pictures of decay and deterioration or suggestions of where things once stood, I thought I'd have a go at photographing things that don't exist yet, or so this series kind of loosely dances around that idea of photographing clues of things that are about to come. And again, I think there's about 90 pictures in the series, so it's quite a huge body of work. Is there any more questions or anything whilst we're going through here?
This is the Architectural Association area.
Okay.
Sorry.
Could you talk more about your process in editing your images when you're making a book?
Yeah. I think when I'm making a book, firstly, with all of these series I've shown today, I think most of them have surfaced in a book, and I've ended up making a book of them. Firstly, I think I try to keep the picture-taking stage and the book-making very, very separate. And for me, it's so dangerous, even when I'm photographing, to think of a book or that series in book form. I think it's only at the very end I would decide. I think that's quite important for me to mention. I think because I do make books, and I think it's dangerous, I think, if the book itself starts to steer the picture-making stage. So I only start kind of editing for books when I've completely exhausted the subject, or it's definitely come to an end. And then it's a fine line, because I try not to rush the book-making process, but at the same time, it's almost like you don't want to take too long either. It's almost like when you listen to music or a piece of music you love, you don't want to kind of listen to it or look at it so much that you end up sort of killing it. So I always edit on using work prints, physical prints, usually on a wall or floor space, and just get to know the work and keep revisiting the work and allow it to sort of shape itself. And I would never edit a book at an Apple on a monitor, for example. I really love that process, just working with tangible prints, even if they're quite crude sort of work prints. And it's something I really enjoy doing, and I love this the kind of I guess I do think in series, and as you see today, I tend to make not single images, but bodies of work that are as a series. Has that answered your question? This is another quite descriptive series called Covered and Removed, and it's pictures of removed or deleted graffiti. And I just got quite interested in these shapes and these slabs or jet washed walls where the removal of graffiti becomes just as clear as the actual graffiti itself, and Hackney's council's policy to remove graffiti in 24 hours if it's offensive, or 10 days if it's non-offensive, and the whole thing around that. I quite like this deletion of absence of subject again.
Do you work on different projects at the same time?
Not really. I tend to work on one thing at a time. Sometimes there are projects that overlap. For example, the Buried series and the Flowers, they're definitely linked. But rarely, I would never on the same day work on the same thing. Yeah, and often I wouldn't start something until a body of work's finished. I think only a couple of times have I sort of had a body of work sort of revisiting it. For example, the billboards one, I would kind of dip in and out of that whilst doing other things. This is a series called Birds, and again it's sort of inner city birds, and I really enjoyed doing this because I think one of the things that led me to photography in the first place was birds and animals and my interest in nature, and I decided to do this kind of, again, this idea of sort of stepping back, and although the core and key subject is birds, and so often I suppose photography, the main subject is the most dominant part of the image, but I like the idea that reversing that and allowing other things to creep in, even though the main subject is still the birds. It probably says more about us than it does about birds. But this is a picture of a town pigeon. A heron. Oops, sorry. I can't do it. Carrion crow. A kestrel. Blue tit, which is, I always have to point this one out, sort of middle, up a bit. A collared dove. This is a series, this still work in progress, it's new work. I say new, I've been doing it for a few years now, so it's kind of quite a long-term body of work, which I kind of sidestepped to do the commission in Brighton that you mentioned, which was a similar technique, where I've been sort of, I guess it's maybe a little sidestep from the Hackney Flowers, where I was laying objects on top of the images, but this time just putting things inside my camera. So the idea behind it was just using the camera as like this vacuum cleaner rather than this descriptive tool. So just trying to really suck up bits of Hackney. I'm really enjoying working this way. It's, I guess, partly because, again, that element of surprise, and you have no idea what the pictures are going to look like until you process the film, and also by knowing what's in the camera, you're sort of leaning and steering the pictures, but you don't know where they're going to land. And I guess also this idea of, but when you're adding things to the camera, you're also obscuring, so this idea of sort of deleting as well as adding, and
I'm quite interested in the practicalities of your method. Do you put things in and expose the entire film, or do you take a dark bag with you, a black bag?
Yeah. In a way, you're forced. In this case, there's 12 pictures on the film, so I open the camera back, put in the selected objects. Often I've been collecting them, or they could even be in the vicinity of where I'm about to take the picture. Mm-hmm. Then load a film, wind it on carefully to number 1 after closing the bag, and then turning the camera facing the sky, so shaking it quite hard if there isn't any living creatures in the camera. And then I've got this mirror device, so the objects are literally sitting on top of the film emulsion. So the subject, when the shutter opens and closes, the subject is on both sides of the lens. So then after you've taken your first picture, then you tilt the camera back down, bash the back so all the objects fall off the film, because otherwise the film processor would get really angry if there's loads of stuff caught up in it. Then wind to number 2, and then shake the camera again. So it will always be the same contents, and in this case, I think it's a bit of glass. You can see the veins of a deteriorated leaf. I think the back end of a wood louse. That's a wood louse, I think. So I probably didn't shake it too much.
Thank you very much for sharing your
That's all right.
technique.
Yeah, that's some more wood louse.
Can I ask? Sorry. Can I?
Yeah.
Can I ask about your idea of Hackney, where you seem to, really have an interest in it,
but the area.
How do you, I don't know, conceive of it? Like if you kind of cross the road and you're in Tower Hamlets, does that?
Yeah, I think.
Feel like not the right thing to do, or?
What do you mean?
I don't know. So how rigid are you with your idea of the place?
I think East London in general, I'm really interested in. I think partly, as I mentioned at the beginning, for years I was so interested in the place where I was living, but didn't know quite how to make work there, even though I had such a strong desire to. And I think it's just, for me, it's sometimes quite hard because it's kind of half familiar, but there's things that you see that you're attracted to, or you're maybe upset about, or you feel that you could react to it in some way. And I think that for me, I don't know, it's just almost too easy to turn your back on a place and go and photograph elsewhere. And I really feel so drawn to getting to know a place that you think you know, but then realising that you don't. And so I think all of these series keep leading me in different directions, but completely guided by the place, really, and a fascination with the place, and maybe too much as well. I think sometimes you just think, I have to bring this to an end, and then the next day you find yourself cycling along the same canals. And so it is it's a dangerous thing as well, because this place carries you, and I think it's a little bit dangerous obsession as well with.
How did it work in Brighton? Because as you said, there's a lot of the series come from studied looking at the same thing, like the sort of wheelie trolleys and things, just of noticing after periods of time. How long did you spend in Brighton?
Brighton was I guess it was quite difficult for me, because partly I was never that attracted to Brighton as to go and make a body of work, and it was a commission piece of work, and I think the word commission has always really scared me and sort of made my toes curl, really, even though it was nice to be asked. There is a pressure because you're making work that has to be completed within a certain time parameters and geographically within. So I think, and then you keep getting emails and phone calls saying, "How's it going? Have you finished yet?" And you haven't even started. So I think I get really nervous at that, and I find very difficult. So the way I managed to kind of dilute, that was. Just to kind of forget that you're doing it and really try and get into it, which what I did is bought a fishing rod, and for the first 5 days went fishing and just got to just really try to engage with the place, and then the pictures started to sort of make themselves, and then before I knew it, the work was completely making itself, and I was really enjoying it, and I absolutely loved it. And I took my bike with me, and my girlfriend came as well, and we had to, it was like a 4-week time. It was great, and again, you're just trying to. I didn't want to sail. I didn't want to attempt to do a body of work saying this is Brighton, because I don't know the place, and so I really, really wanted to be guided by the place, and I felt this technique, not just was my mind was so immersed in that because of my work in Hackney, but it just felt absolutely perfect for Brighton to see sort of regurgitate it, and yeah. That's Ada, who's here tonight. She's 5 months old. That was ice. So yeah, I started to put all sorts of things in the camera, and in the winter months I was putting ice from the puddles and canals. So you've got to work very quickly, so you've got to take 12 pictures before the ice melts in the camera. And there's been quite a lot of different, I've got through quite a few cameras doing this. And I was adding sort of glow-in-the-dark crystals from an East London aquarium shop, and even in the Brighton series I was adding sort of burning bits of charcoal. And sorry, I'll speed up a bit. This is a series that I've not long done. It's a photographs taken in the Eton mission, and what I've been doing as well, you mentioned books, I've also since I think 2004 I've been using old books to house, because I couldn't afford to print them or didn't feel it deserved to be a big print run, so I would use existing books to be the shell for new books. And I bought quite a lot of books from Hackney Library. They sell their discarded books, so this is the pictures taken in the Eton mission, which I've got, which was established in 1885, London. But it's a beautiful building, and which was being squatted at the time, and now it's, I think, come to an end. So. I think as well it might be worth mentioning that I think my more recent work is sort of leaning this way. So I mentioned before sort of less information, so a lot of these pictures sort of overexposed and out of focus and just sort of holding back information. And I don't know, thank you. Is this number 3 or 4? 4. Oh good, so it's nearly finished. So there's so many pictures. Is everyone all right for time? And I think it's not that many. This is last carousel, yeah. And these are pictures actually not taken in East London, so I shouldn't really present them this evening either. But the way I feel they're valid here is I look at this work, and this was made over like a couple of years really, and I think it's definitely, I see it as a reaction piece rather than, for me it's not about Japan at all. It's probably more about a reaction to my life in London at that time, or just the chaos of living in the city. And I think this was sort of an attempt to kind of completely mute that chaos, and the idea behind it is quite loose, but I became quite interested in aquariums and decided to make a big body of work, an aquatic series, where the sort of human and aquatic or marine life met, and so it's almost as if it's taken from the other side of the glass. This series is called Coming Up for Air, and occasionally there's a picture like this which like more clarity, and that's that idea of kind of coming up, have a breath, and then it goes a bit more.
Stephen, could you talk a little bit about drawing as a process to you? I know you do lino cuts, and sometimes you mark in terms of, certainly of making your books, mark making is a part of it. Could you talk about that in relation to your photographs?
Yeah, I think that's quite a nice thing to do. I think sometimes either side of making work I do little sketches, sometimes just things that are starting to form in my head before making work. But usually, I think after being so involved in a body of work, I think sometimes you're just so immersed in something that I think drawing or making etchings or lino cuts is a way of kind of just getting rid of that excess energy, really, or just the subject so much inside you. I think it's just nice to kind of, for me, it's a nice way of completing and bringing something to a close as well. But I think it's more that, just emptying your head. And I'm not very good at drawing, but I do really like that. I just really enjoy it, and just sort of marrying images of that forming in your head or in relation to the work that may not even look like the work in some cases. And often they end up in books for sort of jackets or end papers and things. And I suppose it's sometimes as well an attempt to marry with what you feel is the spirit of that series. Or This is the last picture in this series. Now it's up to everybody if I should show the outside in series from Brighton, or we could stop there. If there's time, shall I? I've left a gap deliberately just in case the answer was no. So this is the Brighton series, or extract from the Brighton series that Johanna mentioned. And it's called Outside In.
Stephen, you chose to show some objects with this series in Brighton. Can you tell us, you chose to show the objects with this series and made it a lovely display case of ephemera, which changed of ephemera, a display case of ephemera. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. When this work was presented as an exhibition, the prints are just over 1 metre, so they're quite large. So it really kind of stretches these tiny bits of algae and seaweed and things. And also what I did is in a vitrine I displayed most of the objects, including sort of tails of mackerel and bones that I've caught, which also ended up going in the camera as well. And so I love the idea of just really, I don't know, almost displaying them in quite a serious way, and I think it became quite a nice thing in itself, really.
Do you see that going back to the beginning, the inventory that you're interested in?
Pardon?
Does that bring everything back to the beginning when you were talking about inventories and typologies and trying to?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, because it was laid out in really a clean, quite descriptive way. Yeah. Of course, the live creatures weren't there, but most things were there. But I stupidly, sort of for a joke, but now this work will be shown in a gallery in Stockholm next month, and at the end of the show, I just thought I'll keep all the bits, but I don't think it will ever be shown again. So I just got Hoover and just hoovered up everything. And then the gallery in Stockholm said, "Oh, we'd like to show the bits as well." So I sent them a Hoover bag full of bits, and they're going to decipher it. So that's gone. But it was a new Hoover bag, so it wasn't mixed with any other things other than. But it was quite a nice thing just at the end of the show, just to Hoover it all up. It took me 4 days to display it in like 30 seconds to suck it all up. Some of these pictures I was using the sunlight that was falling onto Brighton, that was passing through a magnifying glass, and using the sunlight to sort of etch directly into film surfaces as well. Some of these objects, for example, that's flying cement mixer. What I would do is take a photograph of a cement mixer on slide film, cut it out, process it, cut it out, and then add it back into the camera. So it's sort of, in-camera sort of contact sheet stroke photograms. And that is the last picture. Yeah, thanks for seeing that. Oh, so many.
I've got loads of questions, but I'm really keen for everyone to get a chance as well to ask Stephen anything. Yeah, just wait for the mic there on the other side. Thanks.
Oh, hi. I was wondering, going right back to the beginning, how you said when you moved to London, you couldn't really photograph London, so you photographed Poland and Croatia.
Yeah.
And then when you came back, do you kind of see that the work you was photographing was the subjects were quite insular in a way?
Yeah.
Though, the people with their headphones, the old ladies with their whole world in their bags, and.
I think it would very much so. It was really. I think that was my only way in, because it was London's so overwhelming and so visually stimulating or bombarded with lots of thoughts, and so I thought it was almost impossible to do the kind of this London, or body of work about London. So I found my only way to gradually ease myself in was to choose things that were just tiny subjects. And I think as years went by, maybe I got more and more confident, and it sort of started to get looser. And so now my work is a little bit more general rather than such tiny subject matters as people with headphones or women pushing trolleys. I think almost got too easy, and as much as I love that typographical studies, I think I was also searching for other things, and I just wanted to kind of shake that off a little bit because it got almost too easy. It's almost, I think photography is almost too good at that, and I started to enjoy working more with photography's weaknesses as well as its strengths.
I'm really intrigued about the way you think about photography and the way you think photographically, and you talk about this sort of taking information out of the photograph, but then the sort of by working sequentially you kind of put it back in again because it's kind of there. And I was thinking also about the way that most of us probably encounter your work is through your books, and that kind of imposes a sort of physicality, a sort of I don't know, some not sort of performative element, but it's very rare that we'd sit and just watch them being moved without moving ourselves sort of through them. That kind of adds another kind of level to it.
Yeah, I think books is just, I think it's partly was born out of necessity, but also I just got so into making books and dangerously sort of steering my work away from galleries and museums. I think to the point where I started dangerously thinking, the book is the finished piece of work, and most people would maybe see that the other way around. They would make books to accompany a show, but I was really thinking the shows are to accompany the book. The book is the finished piece of work. Really.
And is the book, what does the book allow you to do in that way? Is it because it's the pacing of it, or the? I
think certainly the pace, and I think that fixed sequence, I really spend a lot of time and thought in, as we were discussing earlier, the sort of editing stages. I don't know, also they're kind of more affordable to more people, I suppose, which is always appealing. And when I was starting to make my own books, I thought, I just love the idea of making really high quality books that people could afford it, and prints are just so expensive. And so I think just allow the books sort of have a life of their own, and that's very appealing, especially when you're photographing things like the Hackney market or people rummaging around in skips and then selling prints for thousands. I think books narrow the contradictions, particularly for some of the subject matters.
I want to know about the concept that you shoot the people on the train. Did you ask them to shoot, or do you just candid them?
I asked every single passenger on the train, and what would usually happen, I would walk from one end of the train right through every car, and I quite like working that way because you're not asking somebody based on how they look, you're just asking everyone, and I quite like this way because often photographers are like, that's an interesting character, and I kind of try to not do that. It's just kind of the next person I see, I'm going to ask if I could take their portrait. And what I found was, particularly in train cars, it's like asking for money. If you ask someone for change, somebody would often, if the first person said yes, then most people through the whole car would. But if the first person you asked to photograph said no, then probably most people in that car will say no. So, but that's how it worked, and then I would usually get something to eat in Southend and take the train straight back and do the same again. And I mean, it was almost very controlling. The pictures look quite spontaneous, but there's a lot of almost too much thought process gone into that. I deliberately waited to do that series until the autumn time, So the leaves were like orangey, and so you've got this lovely warm glow coming into the train. I would always take the pictures when the train was either pulling into or pulling out of a station. So there was less, you're being thrown around less, so you could hold the camera still. There was little things like that so they had that. I really wanted them to be like rock solid and really uniform, and just that, because I love trains and just that idea of, you know, we're close proximity of strangers, but not, you know, this, and I deliberately didn't ask people's names, occupations, or where they were going and why. It was just as another passenger would see that person. Yeah, I think they were made in like 2004. Yeah, but I don't. It's weird because these days I think I notice my work's leaning more towards plants and landscapes, and I don't know if I'm sort of, my confidence goes up and down. Sometimes, like these days, I think I don't know if I could do that now. Sometimes it just depends. Yeah, and also as a photographer, you feel such a pain. Photographers are just like, you know, always asking people, and so I don't like, as much as I have a strong desire to. I sometimes, it's a fine line. You don't, you know, just yeah.
One over there, and then I'll
I'm just wondering whether you felt or feel now a sense of nostalgia towards the photographs taken in and around Hackney, particularly within what is now the Olympic site and the fringes of that.
Yeah, I think the answer is probably yes. I mean, I do. The thing I definitely miss going there. I mean, I don't know quite why, and I'm sure other people here who know that part of London or live there, there's definitely, I mean, that place gave me so much, and you know, looking at those pictures now, even though they're packed with maybe snippets of information or descriptions of a place, looking at that work now, it probably says more about me just kind of this kind of getting out. It was so much about getting on my bike and just cycling every day, and yeah, just exploring. And then there was lots of meadows and really, really nice places that I would often go, or with friends as well, have barbecues and stuff. It's kind of like, it was a time, and I do look back and I do miss it, but also I'm not scared of change either. I'm not, you know, I'm not that scared of change that I really like get angry about it or anything. It's a shame, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to ask about being a photographer and being kind of a pain to people, to ask them to photograph. Are people kind of freer when you ask them to describe things like the audio?
Yeah, I mean, that's been really interesting for me, the audio portraits. I think also because you're not asking to take somebody's picture, and often we're so worried about how we'll be perceived or where and how the picture will be used. And I think especially these days, I mean, I'm sure everybody who takes pictures has felt such a huge shift in how you can make work. And I was thinking even on the way here, just like, I'm sure over the next few years, how can I put it? Like, what we don't photograph will say more about the time we live in than what we do. I think it's really, I think that's so interesting now, what was being prevented from photographed, or so the pictures that we're not making will probably be more revealing than the ones we are. I don't know. I was thinking that on the way here, like, because it's so hard to take pictures now anywhere, and you know, for various reasons, and which is a shame, yeah. But making pictures is definitely harder, and of course you continue, but it's just things have changed a lot, I think. Yeah. Sorry, I probably didn't even answer your question.
We've come to the end. We've used up our time in
Yep.
the AA, but thank you so much, Stephen, for
Thank
being
you.
so generous.
No, it's great. Thanks very much for coming.